we're going to go ahead and recreate this page, we're going to really pull from Bootstrap. And what is important to note is like up at the top here, you have a nav, and then you're going to start really building like your header. And what's kind of interesting is that your nav and your header are flipped. And then you're going to start having your article and information below. And then your footer is going to be at the bottom. But inside of there, we're really going to pull from Bootstrap to find this coding so we don't have to create all of it. And what's important about Bootstrap, again, is that it is responsive. So as I take this and I size the window down widthwise, sooner or later, that navbar becomes a drop-down menu. And that's a collapsed navbar that then will be allowed to be uncollapsed or expanded to see everything. So when we do this, we want to make sure that we're utilizing the Bootstrap, because that's a lot of coding that you don't want to have to create. You don't want to have to create the browser figuring out how wide the page is so then it collapses at a certain point and all those kinds of things. That's a lot of stuff to make. So and probably out of your wheelhouse too, which is perfectly fine. And that's the beauty of Bootstrap, is that we can take it, we can utilize it, and then we can customize it. So on the Bootstrap website, I'm going to go to the docs up here and search for navbar. When you get into navbar, you're going to see that it requires a wrapping of a navbar because it needs to know that it's responsive for collapsing, and there's color scheme classes that we can use. So I can actually open this up and talk about, how I can make it blue or light blue. I could also create a customized color scheme if I wanted to. And as you continue moving through here, it talks about all these different pieces that are available. And then that first one has everything inside of it. It shows you an example of having the logo or the name, having a home button that is active. See how it's slightly darker than the other two? Having links where you hover over them, they slightly change. A drop-down menu link that has other options and a separate section. A disabled link that's there but no longer clickable, and a search engine. And that's everything inside of here. And what I want to point out about this is notice that they're using a nav tag because it's a nav, and they're creating a lot of classes and using multiple classes at the same time. In addition to that, they are creating this navbar inside of a div called container fluid. And that container fluid div allows it, again, to be able to figure out how wide the page is and collapse if needed. The first thing it has after it puts it into its own box inside of the nav is you have a navbar, and you can see that right here. Navbar, as you can see, has an A tag, which means it's a clickable link. And if you go to like CNN.com, for instance, when you're on a page, this is that logo or that word. And then these are your links in that navbar, and then you have more available. And as you take this page down, you can see that sooner or later their page collapses into a expandable navbar. If I go to a new page and I'm on business, for instance, this CNN right here, it's still a clickable link. So when I go to click on it, it takes me back to usually the home page. And that's what this word right here does. Now, does it have to say navbar? No, you can make it say whatever you want. You can actually make a picture like CNN did. And that's why it is an A tag. A pound sign is usually used as a placeholder for an href that goes nowhere. So like I can click on this and it goes nowhere. And that's what the pound sign is for. So that's this first word. And the second thing that happens is there's a button called a navbar toggler. And it happens and toggles when it needs to collapse. So I think this is important. It comes after the word navbar. And the reason it does is because as your page gets shorter in width, notice the word navbar doesn't collapse into this button. It's still available. That's why it's up above the collapse button. When it collapses, it's collapsing everything in the div right afterwards. So you can see this full next div is everything that got collapsed into this button. And that's how the navbar is working. Inside of that second div, you have a list. And that list is creating this entire link option. So you have links that are there, and each link is seen as an A tag inside of a list item. And then if you wanted to include a drop-down menu, you have a list within a list. So here's a list item for that drop-down menu that says drop-down. That's right here. And then this UL creates a new list of a drop-down menu. So you can see here, drop-down menu, and there's action, another action, and something else here, which is right here, action, another action, and something else here. And that's that drop-down menu. Then you have a disabled link, which you can see has a class of disabled inside of it instead of like a drop-down toggle or a nav link or a nav active. And then the last thing we have is a form outside of the list, but inside the collapsible part. And that's your search form. And that creates this right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to copy it and then we're going to customize it. Going back to our page, I'm going to go ahead and take the two things we've created, the H1 tag and the paragraph tag, and I'm going to delete those out of the body. So there should be nothing on your page at this point. We're then going to paste in that nav bar. Now, when I paste it in, the first nav is slightly indented, but everything else needs to be indented again, so I'm going to select it all and just hit tab on my keyboard. Okay, so now we have a nav bar. Let's start customizing it. Let's say we're going to make a page about our favorite animal, and it's going to have other pages linked to it. So under navbar here, where it says navbar in that first option, I'm on line 19-ish. You are going to change that to the name of your favorite animal. So I'm going to put giraffes, and that'll change that right there. I'm then going to go ahead and change these links. I'm going to leave home the way it is because usually home tag is a tag, or home is what I want to use as a tag. I then am going to have a link that is called anatomy. I'm going to take my drop-down menu and change that to species. And then I'm going to go ahead and go to this disabled link. And I actually don't want a disabled link. I want a fourth link that is not disabled. So to change this from being disabled and making it look like, let's say, anatomy, what is the difference? So let's look. An LI, class of nav item, okay, that's consistent. An A tag with a class of nav link, consistent, but then it has this disabled option. I do not want that. So I'm going to delete that part out of it. And then you can see that under anatomy, the only other thing that's in there is the attribute of href. Well, I have tab index and aria disabled. I don't want either of those attributes either, so I'm going to delete those, making this then an active link. And you can see it's active because when I hover over it, it changes the way it looks. And I can then go ahead and change it from disabled to habitat. Last thing is, what if I wanted my drop-down menu of species to come before anatomy? Well, you have to think about not only are you grabbing the word species, but you're grabbing everything in that drop-down menu. So I'm going to go ahead and look at where species begins, go above it, and remember that all of it exists inside of one list item. So I'm going to grab that entire list item. I'm going to cut it, Control X to cut. I'm going to go up above anatomy, in between the closed list item for home and the open list item for anatomy. Click enter and paste it, and that will reorder it before anatomy. Your drop-down menu won't work in Dreamweaver, so we're going to go ahead and save this. I'm going to go to a File Explorer window. I'm going to go to my Digital Design 2 folder where I made my example website folder and open up my index inside of Google Chrome. So then I can go ahead and see what my page actually looks like. So here's my page, here's species, there's a drop-down, search bar all the way over to the right, and it says giraffe, and you can test that drop-down menu. And that is how you can bring in a nav bar.